What if the key to ending burnout culture is in the stories of those who've lived it and come out the other side? In this powerful episode of the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing podcast, 3 prominent New Zealand leaders open up about their personal journeys through crisis and recovery. Hi, I'm Sarah McGuinness, founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, and I'm on a mission to break burnout culture for good. This podcast is all about giving you practical tips and ideas to create a healthier, more supportive workplace and support your wellbeing too. Today, I'm joined by Joanna Sinclair, National Clinical Lead for Employee Wellbeing at Whatu Health New Zealand, and a consultant anaesthetist.
Culture within medicine really strongly values stoicism. Like you have to cope. You have to be seen to cope. You push things down and you move on to the next patient because you kind of have to. Like if you've resuscitated one patient in ED, there's another patient in the next door room that needs resuscitation as well.
I'm also joined by Rob Beard, owner of Beard Brothers Smallgoods.
Just having to really almost retrain my whole brain of how to live life again without the demons.
And I'm joined by Matthew Tukaki, chair of the National Māori Authority.
For me, I made a very simple decision. Because I couldn't walk and because I couldn't talk, I decided in my mind that what I needed to do was simply set a single task of being able to get out of the bed.
Join us for a real and honest conversation about the toll of burnout, mental health, and challenges in leadership. Our guests share their personal experiences, what helped them recover, and practical ways to support employees through tough times. We also touch on suicide in this episode. So if anything feels heavy, please do reach out to your trusted colleagues, friends, or local support helpline. I've called a helpline myself and it made a really big difference. And as our guests say, these conversations matter.
I'm Jo Sinclair. I'm currently the Interim National Clinical Lead for Employee Wellbeing with Health New Zealand, Whatu. So my background is I'm an anaesthetist, so a doctor based at Counties Manukau in Auckland. And my experience comes from when I was a new consultant a couple of years in and had an episode of quite significant burnout then. I guess going back a wee bit, I've always been really interested in doctors' health, and that stems from early in my training, starting to hear about some of the stats around when anaesthetists get into trouble. There's some scary stats around, burnout, suicide, substance abuse, things like that. So having spent a lot of time learning more about that side of things and with a real interest in doctors' health, I was very aware of what burnout was and also where it can land you. And even with that knowledge, I didn't see what was happening to me until it was really obvious and in my face. And for me, in my face was I realized that I wasn't feeling connected to my patients. I had that real compassion fatigue that they talk about with burnout. And I realized I was almost resenting my patients. My kids were quite young at the time. And I can remember thinking things like, this work is driving me mad. It's just stopping me from being at home with my kids, which is where I really want to be. I still felt engaged with my team that I was working with. I was almost more happy to have trainee doctors with me because they would go and see the patients and I wouldn't have to. And I really thought, this is not how I'm supposed to be feeling as a doctor. What is going on? And realized that it was burnout. And I think at the same time I thought, I know what happens to doctors who burn out, and I'm not going to be one of those statistics. And so I was already thinking about starting to get help, but then had a major case that went really badly, and it wasn't through anything that I did, but I was already in that headspace where I was telling myself I wasn't good enough as a doctor. I was burning out, so clearly I couldn't cope. Clearly I wasn't, the way I was feeling about my patients isn't how doctors are supposed to feel. So clearly I'm not a good doctor. And so then when something goes wrong, you kind of think, well, this is just proving the point that I'm not good enough. And so in some ways it kind of ripped the scab off and it landed me in a heap so that I got help right away, which really helped. But I think the biggest thing that I've taken away from it in terms of what really impacted my recovery the most was, I said I had compassion fatigue, I lost my compassion for my patients. And sometimes when we get in that burnout space, we think, I need a break from this, I need to get away from this. But I read a story about a someone describing a patient interaction with an elderly patient that really triggered something about what I had loved when I first started practicing as a doctor, and that was the connection with my patients. I had a lot of elderly patients in my first sort of rotations, and hearing their stories and really spending time with them. And I thought maybe if I actually make a choice to move towards the patients instead of away from the patients, that maybe that will help me connect in with what I liked. And so I actually said, as much as you want to run a mile and get away from this place, go and sit with the patient and actually talk to them, see them as a person, get to know them a bit. It might take a bit longer than you're supposed to take seeing a patient, but spend that time and see what happens. And of course, we know from the evidence that if you make a choice to engage in being compassionate with somebody, it actually does make you feel better, chemically, physically, everything. And that was a real significant thing, choosing compassion really helped my recovery quite significantly, and seeing a psychologist and doing all those other things as well. But I think that was really the key that helped me reconnect with what brought me joy about being a doctor.
Thank you so much, Jo. Thank you for sharing your story. And I'm looking forward to diving more into some of those factors that contributed and the other side, and particularly that point around connecting with others. I think it's so important. Rob, I'm going to go to you next.
Oh yeah, well, hey, firstly, thanks for having me. So my name's Rob Beard, so owner and founder of Beard Brothers Smallgoods here in the mighty Hawke's Bay. Just some really, really interesting things, very similar to just this hearing that story. We created this business, my wife and I, in a shipping container in our backyard. We never really had big aspirations. I'm a viticulturalist by trade. Left school at 15. Pretty much, I still don't own a computer. I've got a phone. That's what I'm doing this on now. Just a normal, simple fella. Yeah, I got out of the wine industry 2011, 2012. Had a lot of things happening in my life at that time, and decided to start a business. Well, my wife and I started to start a business, basically, which was Wild Game Salamis, which was our original business. So I'm always do a lot of hunting, keen hunter, and just started making our own salamis, and left my job, which was about 120K with a vehicle, and I was in a pretty happy place, but needed to sort of challenge myself a little bit. Yeah, well, fast forward where we are now to where we are now. I sold Wild Game Salamis, but still own Beard Brothers, and it's charging. But I've learned a lot between there and now. Myself really, really hitting the wall nearly probably 3-4 years ago to the day almost, and almost taking my own life. So learned a lot about burnout, lost a sister to suicide, and pretty much found myself in that very same situation. So it means a lot to me to be able to talk about my own personal experience. I always think I was very quiet about it to start with, but there's so many things that I've learned along the way on how to sort of negate it, I suppose, or do your best to negate it. I'm just, it's like I say, thankful to be on this Zoom, and also thankful to be here, actually. I'm thankful and grateful to still be on this earth and enjoying taking, it's just, so you're just saying before about connecting with your patients. It's a bit like you need to reconnect with what you absolutely love and go back to that, go back to the start. Yeah, that's a little bit about me, and
thanks, Rob. Yeah, I want to acknowledge the journey you've been on, because it's almost like two planes, isn't it? On the first plane is the business success that you've had and how that's ramped up, and then at the same time that incredible personal challenges that you've navigated, but so amazingly come out the other side. And it's just such a delight to see that, and I'm just so grateful to have you on the call. So thank you so much for sharing that. I look forward to exploring some of those things in a moment more with you. And so Matthew, I'll call on you next.
Well, thank you for having me. 2 quick caveats. If you think that I'm slurring my words, I don't want you to think I'm a day drinker. I have not been day drinking except for really bad shit coffee. The second thing I've got to say that I'm a big fanboy of Rob's, and I believe everybody should have black pudding for breakfast at least one weekend a month. I had to say that. I've been working myself up to saying that, Rob. Just over a year ago, I died. I had a massive aneurysm that led to a stroke called a cerebellum. From that, I had an aortic dissection that was diagnosed, and also I've been recovering from, let's just say, a range of unwanted friends in the back of my head. I was in a coma for a while, having collapsed at a work event, and let's face it, if I hadn't been stuck in Auckland traffic, I probably wouldn't have made it. I wouldn't be talking with you today. So I'm just thankful that I had an ambulance service in another country that managed to get me to the hospital on time. For me, it's been a hell of a journey. So when I woke up from the coma, I realized that I couldn't walk and I couldn't talk. So I've had to learn to walk and talk again. Hence the day drinking comment and the slurring of my words on the odd occasion. I also woke up and discovered that the back of my skull had been removed to drain the fluid from my brain. And also I woke up bald, although I couldn't see me being bald because I'd shaved pretty much all the front of my head off. And there's a massive scar that looks like the Deep Rock Canyon going all the way up on my the side of my head. I also woke up not realizing, well, obviously I realized, but I couldn't see. I'd lost my vision, and so it's taken me a little while to get that back. And so basically, being thankful that I didn't remain dead on the operating table when they got to me on time, I survived one hell of a journey. In the years leading up to that, I led the review into Oranga Tamariki as chairman of the Ministry for Children, and also was New Zealand's director of the Suicide Prevention Office at the Ministry of Health. And before that, obviously, a lot of work in Australia as chairman of the Suicide Prevention Australia. And so I've been in that sector for quite some time. The last thing I remember in terms of my work was leading the Coronial Investigations Review, which was no easy task. In fact, probably all the jobs that I've undertaken up until the point that I got crook has caused me great grief. And I do not suggest for one moment anybody wants to take on even one of those tasks in their working career. Now I am back into a field I've really loved and enjoyed. I was a national broadcaster over in Australia for a period. So now I'm back running a Māori broadcasting network here in Auckland. That's a little bit about my story. It's been horrendous, but here I am. I've learned a lot of things along the way in that journey. Number one, to front yourself and trust yourself. And the second is that it's not just about me on this journey, it is about my family as well. So what was impacting me wasn't just about me, it was about my family, and it causes you to think about all the other things that occur around you. The first thing I remember, if I can just quickly share this, Sarah, was the wise words of my little brother as I waked from the coma with all these cords or things down my throat that I couldn't really get a word out. He leaned over, he whispered in my ear, "What are the 4 numbers to the credit card?" He was after the PIN number, the little hilla. And the irony is today, as I join you, in 2 weeks, I celebrate my 50th birthday. I never thought I would get there. My dad died around the same age as me at 48, about 20 odd years ago, of what we now know to be something quite similar. Yeah, I've got a lot of stuff I could share, and I got a lot of criticism of the Joanna of the health system I used to be a senior leader in too, but maybe I'll leave that for another day. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Matthew.
Oh, sorry, one last push. Go the black pudding.
It's definitely good for health.
No, it's not.
Let's dial back to before your individual crises. Were there signs or symptoms or things that you noticed? And Joanna, you talked a little bit around this early on, that you started to notice some things. But one of the things we know for people, particularly when they go through something so significant, is that there were signs and symptoms, but often it's not till afterwards that you look back and go, oh my goodness, now I know that those were things I should have paid attention to. Open floor between the three of you, whoever would like to go first. Are there things that you look back on now and think, oh, that was a sign I should have paid attention to?
Rob here. Yeah, 100%. So in my case, I had taken on way too much. Had always thought I was sort of 6 foot tall and bulletproof on my short ass. So I'm not 6 foot tall, but I always thought I was pretty tough, pretty, very stereotypical Kiwi fella. I could just work. And as the business grew, the pressures started coming on. And the biggest sign, when I talk to people now, was sleep deprivation. So, leading up to my episode, I was having probably no more than 2 hours sleep a night. And it was full blown insomnia, which I sort of wore as almost like a badge of honor in a funny sort of way. I thought my body had tricked itself to think that I really have to be on point 24/7, which includes the time when I'm asleep at night or trying to sleep at night. And so the mind would just start. And that was, for me personally, that was the beginning of the end, so to speak. That's for me personally, that was one of the biggest signs, was sleep deprivation. And just like Joe said before, like the imagination starting to kick in, and the brain had actually switched into a whole separate world. I was living in a different world, and I'd enabled my mind to almost fight itself, if that makes sense. I hadn't taken any steps to stop that. And that was, for me personally, I had a heart attack when I was 38, and like Matthew should be dead, should be 100% 6 foot under. From that, I gave up drinking and changed heaps of stuff in my life. But what that sort of did is I really, really went for it then, because I had no fog from booze. I just changed a lot of stuff, so my energy levels went through the roof, and I just really started driving hard. Yeah, it was that was just too much. Just took too much on. Just took too much on, and didn't ask for help. So that was the signs for me. Now was definitely sleep deprivation and my imagination being my worst enemy.
Can I just add to what Rob said? I mean, I think Rob's absolutely spot on. In the years leading up to me getting ill, I lost 43 kilos. I dropped my weight. I thought my blood pressure was under control. Like most males out there, I think I'm better than Dr. Google. And so I stopped taking my blood pressure medication. And so complacency began to set in when all the signs said to me, oh, no, everything's going to be fine. I'm Superman again. I can do whatever. I can scale tall buildings and leap over the moon and all the rest of it. The truth is, it just doesn't work like that. And also, there's that mindset of taking on more because you do seem to have an air of invincibility about you. If I was being honest with you, I think I packed the Oranga Tamariki job in at the right time, but I should never have taken on the suicide prevention issue so quickly. But for me, I'd had it in my head, because I was shadowboxing a lot of stuff. I had it in my head that this was actually what I came back to New Zealand for. I hadn't come back to work at a bank or God forbid sit around fishing all day and eating KFC like droves. But for me, it was very much about I just went back to that invincibility thing that I had. Now, whether that's a male thing only, I don't know. That's one of the big lessons. So just finally touching on something else Rob said. My issue was shadow boxing. I would imagine, or not imagine, but I would think that a problem was there that wasn't. And so I'd shadow box at it every 5 minutes. And that comes back to Rob's point about sleep deprivation. I mean, I can't believe you operated on only 2 hours. I thought I was pretty bad on 3. Shadow boxing is a big issue that we have, making issues appear real when actually they're not.
Looking back, I could identify some ways of thinking that were probably early signs that I was heading in that direction. And I've always been a bit prone to imposter syndrome, and that was very much going through my head more than it should have been, and in a way that I couldn't kind of rationalize my way out of it. Like now I can kind of recognize the feeling and present myself with maybe some more objective evidence that I'm okay where I am, and it's, so I deserve to be where I am or what have you. Whereas back then it was kind of like, oh, I've just got out of my training. Now everyone's going to realize that I'm not as good as they think I am, or, that kind of thing. So that, I could have seen that more for what it was. I think also, it was a time of transition, big career transition, and a few things about that. So one, when you're a training to be a doctor, going through till your early years in medicine and training as a specialist, it's kind of like a conveyor belt that you just go on to the next thing in the process. And it's not until you get your first consultant job, which is kind of the last task on the conveyor belt, that you actually ever pause and think about, is this actually where I want to be? Almost like I can remember having really vivid thoughts of, okay, I've landed this job, yippee. And then sort of 6 months later, I was kind of like, oh, is this the job that I actually wanted? And is this actually where I want to be? So yeah, so you kind of, it's the first time you've actually ever paused and reflected on where you are. And I think we don't, and as doctors, we don't really have a tendency to put any protections around those big transition periods. And it's almost, in hindsight, it's kind of like predictable that you would have had some thinking like that. I mean, I do remember other consultants talking to me about exactly that experience of like, oh, now what? Because I've been on this journey and now it feels like it's sort of paused or what have you. And so in hindsight, I would say to people, get some protections in around those big times, those big transition times, like professional supervision or coaching or something like that, so that you're just regularly having a bit of a chat about all these feelings that are coming up and kind of try to manage them before they turn into something unmanageable.
I think it sounds like really wise advice, and especially I can imagine for a lot of leaders who are going through the current environment and there are so many pressures on people, that having that ability to have an outlet would be, invaluable. I want to now move to after your events. Tell me what recovery looked like. What did it look like, and what are your perspectives on recovery?
The first thing that I realised is, number one, don't let the system be your only path to recovery. The system is there for a lot of people, but it may not be there for you. So you've got to think pretty quickly about what your pathway to recovery looks like. For me, I made a very simple decision. Because I couldn't walk and because I couldn't talk, I decided in my mind that what I needed to do was simply set a single task of being able to get out of the bed. And that was really important for me, just get out of the bed. Whether I held on to something, and in my case, I ended up holding on to a Zim frame initially, which then turned into a closer rack later on in my house, or alternatively, just thinking about, well, okay, if the system isn't there for me, who might be? Because you get a lot of help at the beginning. A lot of people, including your whānau and your family, they surround you with support, and so do your friends. But eventually, you've got to let go of them versus them let go of you, because they've got their own lives to get back to. So it's not also being reliant on one person or one group or one network. It's about having a multitude of different avenues of support to see you through. And then the third thing I think is really important is set yourself those goals around your recovery, which was fundamental to me. I mean, my goal, and it might be a bit of a fallacy out there that somehow because you've got a big job, you're financially secure. Things don't work like that. And so I had to make a decision because ACC wouldn't cover me. I didn't get any financial support from whomever, from the state. The next big thing was a pathway back to work. Otherwise, what would have happened is I would have just got more stressed about, oh God, who's going to pay the phone bill, or what's going to happen with the power bill, or what's going to happen with the mortgage or whatever. And so these are the things that honestly go through your head when you're lying in that bed. Some of it you shadow box because whatever. And as well-intentioned as people are, the truth is that people just stop coming around and knocking on your door. And so you've got to also accommodate the fourth big thing for me, which is what do I do to fill the time in those dark spaces when it's just me? Alone at night, in those spaces, in the corner of my mind, to stop myself going crazy.
Did you end up with an answer for that, Matthew?
Yeah,
strategies that worked?
Yeah, I did. I mean, so one of the strategies I did was, the first thing I say to people is write it down. And in this day and age, and because I couldn't hold a pen or do anything because I lost my mobility, I still had a mobile phone with a voice recorder on it. So I've got a phone here that still has all of the voice recordings of all the goals that I set myself. So that was the first thing. The second thing I did was I spread out the action items or the goals. I had low-hanging fruit to make me feel good about myself that I succeeded in something. And then I had a couple of things that were a lot harder to deal with that would take time. But I wouldn't, just because it took time, didn't mean to say that they weren't achievable, but I didn't want to feel negative by not reaching the goal overnight, sort of thing. So I mixed and matched like a lolly scramble. You know how you have those chocolate ones that you want, and you have the hardball ones that you don't really want, but your nana gives you because she's got them left over in the cupboard from 1950 bloody one. And so for me, it was very much about mixing and matching the recovery, a combination of positives and negatives.
It was just interesting. There's a comment there that you made. I remember I'm 47 now, so 38's when I had my heart attack. And so I remember I was lying in bed actually, and I said to my wife, Lara, I said, oh shit, there's something wrong with me. I'm getting a sore chest. And so we're sitting in there Googling symptoms of a heart attack. And the day before, I'd been at a mate's dad's funeral, and I'd lifted a really heavy quarter of a cow, cattle beast, into the chiller. So I thought it was just I thought I'd done something to my shoulder, basically. And so this went on for about 4 hours. And then I said to Lara, I said, I'm going to jump in my truck and drive myself to hospital. So I did. I'd suffered a massive heart attack, and they do those troponin levels, whatever, and it was up there with cardiac arrest. Jeez. So that was pretty heavy, then to be just rocked up there thinking I had something, I don't know what it was, and being told at 38, you just had a massive heart attack. That was pretty scary. That was pretty full on. And as at that stage, we had no staff. And so what do they say? I spent 6 months or something of light duty, 2 weeks, and I was working full noise again. So within 2 weeks, I was out of the hospital bed from a heart attack and working full steam. When I look back at it now, I think, how the hell did we do it? But we did it. And that's something I'll never forget, thinking I got nothing. I can't ring. I couldn't get ACC or any. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. So it was either lose the house or work. And so that was the stark reality of it. And I say that openly because that's exactly how it was. But when I led to the big breakdown, which was, talking about, how the recovery side of it, I've shared this before and I'll share it again now. So suicide, I buried my sister in 2011 in Scotland. My dear sister left behind 5 young girls. And at the time I thought to myself, how the hell could she do that? Fast forward to the situation that I was in. And I was extremely lucky to be here, like right now. The pathway to the recovery from there, and Sarah touched on it before, am I right? No, I'm not. I'll never be 100% right again from that episode. So, they call it locked-in mode. And that time for the week leading up to when I was going to take my own life, I'd written all my letters to my family, my mum and dad, 21st letters to my boy, the kids, everything. I'd done everything. And I did it without emotion. To put that into context, it's if you think about that, you're sitting there writing these letters. I wasn't even really shedding a tear. It was I got so bad that all I wanted was to be out of this world and everything to finish. I'd had a guts full, and I don't want to swear, and I'll try not to swear, but I get emotional talking about it now. I wanted out. I wanted out because it was there was just too much stress, and my mind, my brain had convinced itself, the imposter syndrome, like Joe's talking. I wasn't good enough. I was a failure. I was a bad father. I was a bad husband. I couldn't drive this business any further. We just scored this massive thing with the supermarkets and that. My brain cooked. It stopped. So the recovery from that day, I can't even remember the first 4 weeks, to be honest. I couldn't go. It's tough even talking about it, but I couldn't go outside. I love the outdoors. Couldn't go hunting. I couldn't do anything. I literally couldn't do anything. So almost like vegetative for 4 weeks. So the road to recovery was incredibly tough. I was just extremely lucky and grateful to have a lot of people around me that all jumped in, and my wife, our staff, everyone just jumped in and helped out. People come out of the woodwork, old school friends and mates had heard about it, and they're like, holy shit, Rob, of all people, and that was the thing. I was a happy-go-lucky, give me as much work as you can, and away you go. But, I know that my memory's shit now since then. I've done a bit of work with Dr. Angela Lim, and I remember sitting down having a coffee with her one day, and she's, when you're in that locked-in mode, and Matthew, with the suicide present, you'll know all about this, and it's been like getting kicked in the head with a horse, I suppose, like a brain injury. And I know that I'll never be 100% right, and I accept that now. I accept it. The pathway to recovery was to slowly reintegrate myself back into society, which for a guy like me is, you look at me now and you think, oh shit, this guy loves to talk and he loves to do this. But I tell you, it's to get to where I have again now, it's taken a lot of meditation, a lot of talking to the right people, a lot of backing myself, not reading into things too much, just having to really almost retrain my whole brain of how to live life again without the demons coming back. Depression, I found out, I suffer depression. People who haven't got it, the easiest way, or have had it before, the easiest way I can explain it is there's being down, having a bad day, but then there's depression. And I think for me, and I've talked about this again in the past too, that it's like when you get a runny nose and you feel like you're getting a cold, or you get a headache and you get a sore throat, you're getting crook. I know now that if the signs start to come in that I'm going into and I call it the dark clouds coming, the black dog, it's coming, and I know when it's coming. And it can be within 6 or 7 hours. It could be 2 days. It could be 3 days, but I know when it's coming. So now I'm really staunch about what I do when those clouds come rolling in. I put some pretty strong things in place for myself. I up my exercise. So when I start pushing myself, physically, because it releases endorphins and all that cool stuff. And I try to switch off. I try to switch off from work, and I try to switch off, and I reconnect with what I love the most, and that's the sea, that's my family, that's my staff, it's everything that I love about life. I push all my focus into that.
And
can I just add before? I'm sorry, Joe.
No, I could listen to Rob all day.
Just listening to Rob's story is just so bloody powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
The last thing I remember before, so when it happened to me and I collapsed against the wall. I'd already knocked over a vase in the hallway, and so I had fallen into the glass. And so I knew I was cut. I knew I was bleeding, but it didn't really matter because the last thing I remember thinking in the moment was, oh, shit, is this it? Is that it now? I mean, I thought I had longer. And the things that were racing through my head were all the things that I had left undone that weren't quite done yet. And then the final thing that had happened to me before the ambulance guys knocked the door down, because I'd actually managed to crawl to the door to undo the lock. That was one of the best things I think I'd ever done. But I then collapsed back into the wall and held myself up against the wall. And I distinctly remember this. And sometimes I think maybe I don't want to remember it, but I lay against the wall. It was just me there. I didn't know what was happening to me. And I cried. And all I could think of was, oh, God, what are they going to tell Mum? And I know that sounds like a really funny thing to think of. That's what was going through my head at the time. I was more worried about what others see and hear versus what was going on with me. And there was a fantastic lady I used to work with at the Ministry of Health called Robin Shearer. And Robin has been fantastic. And she gave me some wise advice once. And she said, Matt, sometimes it's not about you. Sometimes it is about the people that do care about you. And maybe stop thinking about how the world sees you and think about how the world sees you. Because these people, they pretty like you. They I don't know why you think, your mum wouldn't like you. But yeah, sorry, Rob. I just what you said just was so powerful. Sorry, Joe.
No, all good. Thank you so much, Rob, for sharing that. I think hearing your story is actually really helpful for people that lose somebody through suicide as well, because you've shone a light on what it is really like. There's a lot of that survivor guilt that goes on when you lose someone from suicide. And I think I've heard people talk about that before, about it's just so dark, like you wouldn't imagine, and that almost emotionless kind of feeling. And
it's like a zombie mode.
Yeah. And I think we sadly lose doctors in this country to suicide and other health professionals on a way more regular basis than I would ever like to see. And so we grapple with these kind of things quite a lot, and the feelings of the people that are, that worked with those people, that wonder what they missed and what they could have done to stop it, and those kind of things. So I think I really appreciate you speaking about your experience, Rob. It's really powerful and really helpful to the whole conversation around suicide in our communities as well. I think in terms of my personal experience, I was in a luckier position in that I was in a senior clinical healthcare job. We have a relatively good understanding of what to do when things are really bad for people. We're not so good on the everyday kind of support thing necessarily, but when it's really obvious in your face, we kind of rally around people and support them. So, I had a very collegial group of senior doctors that I worked with who were willing to come in and be a second pair of hands when I was returning to the call roster afterwards. And I certainly did call on that. I think that is the big thing, though. I think, I didn't have any particular worries about income security or that kind of thing, but it's more the reputational stuff. And that's why a lot of doctors don't speak up, because of, we see ourselves as the people that give care. We're not supposed to be the ones that need to have care. Medicine, the culture within medicine really strongly values stoicism. Like you have to cope. You have to be seen to cope. You push things down and you move on to the next patient, because you kind of have to. Like if you've resuscitated one patient in ED, there's another patient in the next door room that needs resuscitation as well. So you kind of have to move on without a lot of time to process things. And so we get trained to kind of be that way. But when it's something personal, it then makes it really hard to be vulnerable, to kind of admit that you're struggling a bit, because you worry that you'll be written off as, not up to the job. You do have to have a bit of bravery to accept the help when it's offered, but I certainly had plenty of help on offer. I can remember actually my first shift back, and I think we get a lot of patients with spinal injuries at Middlemore, and I can remember someone coming in with a C-spine and neck fracture, and they're obviously a little bit more complicated to deal with in terms of giving them an anaesthetic and looking after them through their surgery. And I can remember having the conversation with myself about, no, come on, you've done these before, you should be able to manage these, feeling really kind of wobbly about it and uncertain of myself, and kind of going, no, you've got to handle this. And then I was like, no, you've got a friend who's the second on call person who has specifically said to call them if you need help. And yes, this might be nothing, but do it, call them, get them in here, because there's a patient's life, or disability at stake here. So this is the right thing to do. This is what you have to do. But I really had to coach myself through that kind of conversation, even with all the genuine offers of help and that kind of thing. So it does require a lot of bravery and vulnerability to kind of take help in that situation.
I want to acknowledge, I want to acknowledge
my biggest fear, and Rob kind of touched on it before. Rob, you're becoming the North Star in this conversation.
Yeah.
The biggest fear I had was plateauing. I was worried about, when I mentioned before, asking myself the question, is this it? Actually, that happens throughout the recovery as well. And so I like to move at 1,000,000 miles a minute. And so I thought, I'll learn to walk again. And I calculated in my head, when I was a toddler, it only took a year for me to learn to walk. So it can't be that bad. Because I'm an adult, I might be able to do it in 6 months, I said to myself. But actually, it just didn't work out that way. And even now, I wobble on my feet, and I've had to shadow box myself for the last 12 months around, is this it now for the recovery? Is this how I'm going to be now for the rest of my life? Walking sideways, only being able to knock back one beer at the local club, or that all sounds a bit stupid, but all of those small things go through your head. And in a way, you've got to accept that the recovery isn't something that happens overnight. It's actually probably now going to be for the rest of my life, both emotionally, physically, and psychologically.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I want to just acknowledge, first of all, the three of you and the stories that you've shared. And I can see with the comments coming through, they have absolutely resonated and given words to people that perhaps they didn't have the words to say before, the confidence to know, or the comfort to know that they're not alone in those journeys that they're going through. So first of all, thank you for the three of you for the honesty and the bravery that you've shared. I'm mindful of the time to go on, and I could honestly I feel like we could just have a cup of coffee and we could just talk all afternoon. And And I'm sure the listeners would want to listen in too. One of the things that I would like to ask at this point is around the messages you would give for other leaders who might be feeling that pressure for themselves at the moment. One of the most common things I hear from people leaders at the moment, because I'm mindful, as I said earlier, that you're not just people going through this as sort of individual employees, but you had responsibilities beyond that, both in your work life and your home life. But the most common thing I hear leaders say is, how do I look after myself and my team and do all this work and not burn out? And so I suppose, what would be your advice to those people? And then second, more broadly, in terms of workplaces, what are some of the things they could be doing?
I'm happy to go first through what we do. So the first thing I'd say to all the people leaders out there, or people leading people or managers or whatever, is it's not just about the person that you employ or the person that you might be responsible for. When these things happen, it's also about their families. It's about their whānau, and not only their whānau, but their friends as well. Everybody's got a stakeholder in your recovery. Everyone's got a stakeholder in your pathway back. So it's being cognizant of that, and it's also allowing enough time and space for people to work out that their recovery is also going to include their pathway back to work or within work. There'll have to also be recognition internally of some subtle changes to what the working environment might look like. For people that are going through emotional distress, it might be things that trigger them, everything from the way that the work environment is set out, right through to, when people do start returning to work after a major event, just working with the other employees about, everything. And I don't mean, this word woke and inappropriate questions or anything, but things that might help them reintegrate back into the workplace after sometimes a lot of time off. The second thing, if I might add to that, is understanding, again, coming back to recovery being a long pathway, not a single pathway, is that creating time and space for people to both share their experience internally and their stories, not so much to help others, but to help themselves. Sometimes talking about it does help. It does do a lot. And often what we do, we listen with judgment. The key to this is listen without judgment. Just because somebody might have gone through something, is don't look at them sideways and roll your eyes internally and treat them any differently. Treat them with a modicum of both support and respect at the same time. And so that whole notion of listen without judgment, talk without judgment in your voice is really important. And then the third thing, if I could just add to this, is sometimes we have to shift our thinking about what the world of work looks like. And not just the world of work for the individual, but I come back to the point about family. The spouses in these relationships where somebody has been affected or impacted or going through something are equally as important, because just as that person is going through something, so is their spouse. If I could share openly, and I think a lot of people know this now, I mean, my relationship broke down completely, right to the point where at 50 I find myself on the relationship heap again. And by the way, that's not an advertisement, right? I'm not looking. But the thing is, though, that I hadn't realised until quite later on in the piece that my other half, way better than me, was going through as many difficulties as me trying to reconcile what had happened, including I hadn't realised the impact of them dealing with my impending doom. And even though I take a comedic approach to it and said a lot of times, well, look, the reason I didn't die is I hadn't organised my tangi, or that I didn't really want people turning up to my funeral that weren't on a guest list somewhere. You know, those people that just turn up to make sure you're in the hole and they back up the concrete truck and pour it in to make sure you won't get out again. I had a few of those. But so the world of work has changed. The way we live, work, and play has changed, and we've got to be able to change with it.
And I think I would just add to your original questions here that you can't afford, as a leader, you can't afford not to look after yourself, and actually you're then role modeling that behavior to the people that you lead, and not even just role modeling, you're like telling them that it's that this is a place where we look after ourselves, and this is, I do it, you can do it too. It's acceptable. It's that psychological safety kind of piece, right? If I talk about sometimes things are challenging, then you can talk about sometimes things are challenging as well. And that's how you kind of get to, as a leader, get to understand what's going on. But I think that piece about knowing as a leader that it's okay to not be okay sometimes and to need some help.
I think time is the number one thing that I reckon. Like, if you're finding yourself in a bit of a position, but whatever, is just time. So what I mean by that is find time, spend time, and enjoy the time. So we can't get time back. It's an old phrase, but it's what we can't get enough of. And so if just reconnect with everything you possibly can. If you're feeling a bit shite and you're struggling a little bit, and if you're a little bit directionless or whatever, then just find some time to just go and chill out a bit, connect with family, do whatever you love doing, because whatever gives you happiness, you need that. You need that, just like a car needs petrol. You need to. It's really interesting, when your tank in your car, you're driving along, it's on full, you're always relaxed. But as soon as it goes below half, you start worrying and start getting a little bit anxious. You've still got half a tank of fuel. Well, the brain is very similar. So you've just got to make sure that you take that time. Work's great. We need it. We all need to do it. It's part of life. But so is the time we spend not working.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you found this discussion valuable and you're hungry for more ideas, head to the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing website at rowwellbeing.com. That's rowwellbeing.com. Here you can join the revolution, explore more resources, events and tips to help you break burnout culture for good, and you can register to attend our live recordings and be part of the conversation on the day. To those in our network, thanks again, and we look forward to catching up with you really soon.